Welcome to the Zweig Letter Podcast, putting architectural, engineering, planning, and environmental consulting experts straight talk in your ear. These podcasts deliver great interviews with industry leaders and Zweig Group's 3 decades of invaluable research, leadership, management, marketing, client, and HR advice directly to you, free of charge. The Zweig Letter Podcasts let you develop personally and professionally, wherever you are.
Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm here today with none other than Murrye Bernard. Murrye is an architect and a writer for Architect Magazine, as well as other publications, and we are so excited to have her on the show today. I ran across Murrye when I was reading an article, which we're actually going to go in depth and talk about a little bit on this show in a few minutes. But I ran across that article, and I was kind of blown away by the premise and by some of the dynamics of what Murrye discussed. And I just said, you know what, I've got to get her on the show. I have to find some time to interview her and kind of talk with her about, what she's seeing in the industry as a whole. And so, Murrye, it's so great to have you on today. I just want to just share a little bit with the audience about your background. Murrye is a AIA registered lead architect. She's a writer, she's an editor, she's a strategist based in Los Angeles, California. As I mentioned earlier, her work has appeared in many design publications, including Architectural Lighting, Architectural Record, and Hospitality Design. Most recently, she was the managing editor of Contract Magazine, and she has also served as editor of Associate News and Forward, newsletters of the AIA National Associates Committee, and as contributing editor to E-Oculus, the newsletter of the AIA New York chapter. Murrye earned a Bachelor's of Architecture from the University of Arkansas, go Razorbacks, and has practiced with Polk Stanley Rowland Curzon Porter Architects, which we now know as Polk Stanley Wilcox in Little Rock, Arkansas, and Tech Architects in New York. And now she is based in LA as a full-time writer and as a part-time practicing architect for family and friends. So don't call her if you need work done because she probably can't help you. Is that right?
That's about right. Thanks for the great introduction, Randy. I really appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, no problem. No problem. So we're so glad to have you on. And again, just for my listening audience's edification, we are at Zweig Group. We're based here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So there were so many connections when I read this original article that you wrote on the Interloper. WeWork upends the conventional architecture firm. I saw that you were a graduate of the University of Arkansas, and that you had worked in the state of Arkansas, and now you were doing some amazing things in California. And I said, you know what? I've got to figure out a way to have her on the podcast to share with our listening audience some of what she's experiencing currently in the industry and some of the interesting and insightful topics that she is currently talking about. So again, we're just glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be a part of it.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, what's interesting. What is of the highest interest to you right now? I mean, what is really kind of getting, your juices flowing when it comes to writing about the design industry and specifically, things from an architectural perspective?
I think, as you mentioned, the series of articles I recently wrote for Architect Magazine, those were all exploring, people who studied architecture but are following a non-traditional career path. And obviously there's many ways to do that. In my case, I write about it instead of practice mostly. But for other people, they're still, a part of firms and they're doing something different rather than following sort of, the traditional working your way up from intern to partner. They've started their own sort of unique groups within a firm that are exploring new ideas. So I think that's something that's inspiring and interesting. And just, thinking of other ways that we can use a background in architecture to even work in other industries that, that aren't traditional architecture firms, because the reality is it prepares you to think as a designer to solve problems. And I think that's a really valuable skill to have in many industries.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because I remember, what things were like in the 90s when architects were coming out of school, and, the whole idea was that, well, you're just going to apprentice under somebody for several years before you actually ever get to really go out and do anything. And that whole, model has shifted quite a bit, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And just the way IDP is changing, and you can start working towards getting your license a lot sooner. And, even while you're in school or when you're first working, that, helps people expedite that process. And then, of course, plenty of other people choose not to get licensed. It's just not part of their plan. So I think there's flexibility as far as what your goals are. And, you don't have to follow such a linear path. I think these days people have to be willing to pivot. Pivot is sort of the new term I hear people using a lot when new opportunities come up.
Yeah.
So.
You know what? And so since you mentioned that, I want to just dive a little deeper into this whole idea of licensed versus non-licensed, because it came up in a conversation that I had with a client just the other day. And, two leaders of a very successful corporation, architectural firm that's based right in your backyard there in LA. That was the first thing they said out of their mouths was, listen, this person, they were looking for they were looking for a senior level individual for a certain background and skill set, which is irrelevant. The bottom line was, the first thing they said out of their mouths was, this person doesn't have to be licensed. They want a good architect, but he or she does not have to be licensed, which, often, especially in the area of engineering, we don't always find that to be the case. A lot of times people want that licensed individual. But can you talk a little bit about just the prevailing wisdom that you think exists now in architectural firms, that there's not so much onus put on having a license versus not having one, and the ability to still perform at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, it's mixed. I think it really depends on the firm's culture. I think you may see in a smaller firm, maybe they're not so concerned that everybody has a license, because, one person generally stamps the drawings, and it's really just not necessary. And, in some cases, firms will pay towards their employees getting their license, or offer some sort of incentive. So maybe in some ways they're thinking it's a way to save money. But other firms look at it completely differently. They see it as, being able to, say that we have, such and such number of licensed architects on staff, and that actually appeals to clients, whether they're stamping drawings or not. And certain firms, I know, tend to be larger firms, mid to larger size firms, will not promote people to associate level if they are not licensed. So it really just varies vastly on the firm's culture and the type of work that they do, I think. I think for most people, you have to decide if it's a personal goal. It's a long and arduous process. So unless you're personally committed to doing it, you really have to be in it for yourself in the end.
Yeah. Is that the advice that you would normally share with a young architect that you might run into that's just about to graduate from school?
It's hard. I mean, I would say it's worthwhile to go through the process. I mean, you can always change your mind, at least start doing IDP and start recording those hours, and try to get experience. I mean, because the point of that anyway is to try to get experience in as many areas as possible that will be relevant to practicing. So you might as well do that and become, qualified to take the exam. If you decide not to, you have the opportunity. You don't get into a case where you, a few years later, wish you had, and then try to back document all of that work, which is a lot harder.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it probably, if you think about it, it's not like that knowledge is not going to serve you well. So whether you decide to get the credential or not, you'll still have the knowledge that will always be with you.
It's true. And you can always go back. I mean, if you get your license and then you end up not practicing traditionally, it's still something that lets people know that you were committed enough to go that far. And maybe someday, who knows, maybe someday you want to go back and practice again, on some form or another. Maybe it's not starting at a giant firm, but maybe you want to start your own smaller practice someday on the side, or you never know. I mean, it's good to have it. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, as I look at, again, a lot of your articles and the interactions that you experience in the industry, what are some of the tea leaves that you're looking at right now with regard to the design industry and architectural firms that you think are kind of rapidly changing, where you're saying, this wasn't like it that when I graduated from college
Yeah, I've been speaking with a lot of students lately, and I think it's just interesting to see how education has changed, and mostly technology is at play here, and of course. And the thing that's really surprised me, I'm finding like a lot of students don't come out of school, like, I shouldn't say knowing how to sketch, but they aren't comfortable with sketching and drawing by hand in the way that like my generation and previous generations were taught to be. And that scares me a little bit, just to think of like, sitting down and starting in a computer. It's so precise. Like, how do you, because in my mind, you always start with something much more fluid and then move to those parameters later.
Yeah.
So that, and I'm seeing, people who have been in practice for a while feeling a little bit frustrated with that sort of difference in generations. And I'm sure that happens with every generation a little bit.
Right.
And, there's sort of that disconnect between like technology and then how to approach the design process.
Yeah.
And,
sorry,
go ahead.
No, what were you going to say?
I was just saying, I think one thing too, like in school, everybody feels like there have to be a designer. Like we all go to school thinking we're going to be this, like, not famous architect, but a designer. And I think it's a little bit of a, awakening when you get into practice and realize that most of the people at a firm aren't doing that. And there's a lot of other roles. So, it's kind of, I wonder more how school could prepare people for these options, or how on the other side, how architects or other, people in firms can help mentor new graduates about all the possibilities of different roles within a firm.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because one of the biggest issues that we see at Zweig Group is a challenge that most firms have of making sure that their people are adequately prepared on the project management side, that they understand business development and selling, and marketing and branding. There are so many areas that aren't covered in school. And I don't know if you concur with what you experienced at the U of A when you graduated, but do you feel like you were prepared to step into a role where if somebody asked you to handle a simple proposal, that you could have done it?
No, and that's not a diss on U of A. We did have a professional practice class, and that we did learn some of the basics.
Right.
But we have the textbook. I probably still have it around here somewhere, but I think the thing is, I wish we had business classes. I guess I wish I knew more about how to run a business. And I guess you obviously learn some public speaking as you present in crits, but I think public speaking is really valuable in just learning how to communicate effectively. And I'm not sure, I'm hearing now that schools are reinforcing that a lot more, but I don't really recall feeling prepared. I didn't know anything about putting together proposals. I probably didn't even know what that was when I graduated, but soon after I did get a job working as a marketing manager with a firm, so I learned pretty quickly. But it was helpful to see that side of the business and realize how work actually comes in. So I think, it would benefit students to learn that earlier on in the process.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And we're actually seeing some of my colleagues here that teach classes on entrepreneurship and other programs actually at the Sam Walton School of Business are actually having more engineers and architects take those classes pre-graduation to give them some additional experience and understanding, just so if nothing else, they understand the language. They understand how business is won and what that actually looks like. So.
Exactly. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
For sure.
So you talked a little bit, you wrote an article, The Capitalist, Thornton Tomasetti Bets on Innovation through TTWIIN, which is an acronym. What does that actually stand for?
Oh man, you got me on that one.
I just because I was looking at it here and I'm like, oh man, that's a mouthful. But I think it has something to do with it's the acronym for Thornton Tomasetti, and then it's Weidlinger Associates, right?
Yes.
And then
somehow they put those letters together.
So they've created some type of innovation accelerator.
Mm-hmm. It's like basically an incubator within an architecture firm. Like if you think of how in the tech world, there's sort of like incubators for startups.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's essentially what they're doing, but within an architectural and engineering practice. So they're asking people to make proposals for a lot of times they're apps, but or whatever that could help designers, or they can be any number of things, but they're basically creating this incubator so that they can start these companies within the shelter of this larger firm, but somehow it does benefit them and relate back. So I think that's kind of a really innovative model that we're following. Looking to the tech industry for how to operate an architecture firm, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So now you basically have traditional architects that are working in this space with ideas that they think they could bring to market, essentially. Is that it?
Exactly.
Okay.
And some of them have broken off from that and pursued whatever their startup was if it started to get traction. So
Interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, that could totally upend the model of what a design firm looks like in terms of what they're able to offer. So
very true.
Have there been any specific best practices that have come out of this for design firms with regard to this idea of maybe expanding into this area of startups?
Well, I think a lot of it's retention, just attracting good employees and retention, because it gives them an added benefit that you wouldn't find at a lot of other places. They're showing they're actually investing in the brain power of their employees, which says a lot these days.
Yeah.
So
it's funny you say that, because one of the pieces of feedback that we get from candidates and other individuals that are coming out of, really staunchly, historically, very strong design firms on the architectural side is that, there's never any opportunity for real innovation.
Yeah.
And that can be a challenge. It's not that they don't design great things, but that the ability to innovate is almost non-existent.
True. Yeah. I can imagine that. So that is one answer to that problem. But there's plenty of other ways as well. There's, as we were mentioning, WeWork, which is, you can work for something that's not even an architecture firm, but is essentially doing what an architecture firm does. So that's another big challenge to the industry.
Yeah.
And they're attracting a lot of great talent. And you can argue, well, they are still actually doing what architects are doing, but they're doing it at such a faster, broader scale, which is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, well, and WeWork itself is mind blowing in terms of how quickly they have hit the market and how quickly they've grown to the tune of billions. I mean, they could buy and sell most design firms when you look at their cap, you know, the amount of money that they have brought to the marketplace. But I'd be curious to see just, first of all, what led you to that specific story, and can you talk a little bit about the background of that? Did you just kind of happen to fall into that whole idea, or did somebody bring it to your attention, or how did that work?
Yeah, well, my editor at Architect, Wanda Lau, is very, very smart, very good editor, and I'm not sure if she came up with the story idea. I would imagine so, but they were highlighting just several, I forget how many there were in all, but around 8 people who are sort of pushing the envelope, so to speak, as far as what architectural practice can be. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote about half of the profiles, and another writer wrote the other 4. So it was just a really interesting way to look across the board at how you can use this background to do other things that, whether they're embedded within a firm or in a completely more on the tech side. A lot of them I noticed were really more on the tech side at this point, but it's kind of an eye-opening thing because, a lot of people, the term alternative career path's been around for a while, but what does that really mean? So it's kind of interesting to see some actual examples that are very relevant today based on technology and just, where the job market is headed in general.
Yeah. So now is WeWork is currently hiring, or they have employed architects now?
They do. Yeah, they do. Quite a few. So.
Okay. And in multiple locations?
I believe so. I know several of them are located in New York. I'm not sure offhand if they have them in other locations, but that's the case.
Okay. Well, I'm sure we haven't seen the end of this, and now that there are other firms that are kind of copying what WeWork is doing. Is that correct?
It seems like there are. Yeah, I can see that really being, because there's so many, as more people become freelancers and just, there's less of a need for people to come and be in an office, there is a need to provide flexible workspace. And they don't just do workspace; they're venturing into education and living spaces. I mean, they could really infiltrate every facet of your life and every space that you need, which is kind of a crazy thing to think. But at the bottom line being, I think that we all need flexibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what it's getting at.
So with this knowledge and certainly with the groundbreaking and cutting edge information that you have access to, what do you say to not to the mom and pop architectural design firm, but to the smaller architectural design firm that's trying to keep its footing in an ever changing marketplace? What would you say to them based on the information that you're learning about where the industry is headed?
I mean, I think there's still a place for both. There's always going to be a need for firms that do, projects that are very much rooted to their locale. I don't think that's something that you can just sort of make and distribute everywhere. So there's always going to be a need for good architects who, do residential work or civic work or, retail or whatever different typology that fits in its place, that's of its place. So I think they shouldn't be concerned that they're going to be put out of business. I don't think entirely, but I think it's important to just stay up to date on these changes and bring in new people that are willing to sort of help them think outside of the box a little bit and just to evolve, but there's still going to be a need for smaller firms that are very rooted in the place that they're from.
Okay. Okay. Well, fair enough. So, what are you working on next? I mean, what's coming down the pike for you in terms of things that are really interesting you, of interest to you in the design industry, and things that we may see tagged with your name in future articles? If you want to give our listening audience a preview of that would be awesome.
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm writing a series for Architect Magazine on code-related issues, which at first sounds kind of boring, but it's actually not. So we're tying it to things that are happening in the world that maybe the codes haven't quite caught up with yet. For example, my first one was on micro unit housing, and that's for multifamily housing. We're not talking about tiny houses, but large multifamily developments in cities, and looking at that, is that a way to solve affordable housing crisis, or kind of looking at it in a bigger context, but also looking at what qualifies as a micro unit. And you'd be surprised or not maybe, but codes vary so much across every state and municipality. Like even here in LA, LA County is going to have different requirements than Santa Monica. Right. And so, the same happens everywhere. So like what's micro unit in New York and is different in Seattle, is different in Texas. I mean, it's a big, nobody's really quite defined it, and nobody's really quite decided if this is a viable typology or not. So that's kind of interesting to explore, what the codes say, but also what they don't say. Right. Yeah. So there'll be more articles covering topics like that. And personally for me, I've been working a lot with designers on more like branding related projects. And that can be anything just from helping them to refresh the copy on their website, to writing project descriptions, or just sort of going looking really cohesively at how they're presenting themselves to potential clients and just other architects and the public and whatever audience that may be through social media or other means. So that's really something none of us can escape these days. I feel like you have to have a pretty polished online presence, and we don't always have time. I mean, even my own website right now needs so much help. So it's kind of funny I'm advising people to do this, but it's like the reality is you don't have time usually. So That's where I come in. I have the background in architecture. I speak the language, and I'm helping people to get that out there without them having to spend hours writing it themselves. And let's face it, writing is hard. I mean, I do it for a living, and I still say it's really a challenge. So
it is not easy. That's for sure. So, we'll have to. We have to. I may have to see if I can twist your arm to consider writing an article or two for the Zweig Letter. We'll have to figure something out. So I don't know if we can afford you, but we'll make it work. We'll definitely make it work. But you brought up something, and I just wanted to kind of go back to it when you talked about micro unit housing, because I'd love to get your thoughts on this from an architectural standpoint. But what do you think about the tiny home movement? Because I'm really interested in that, and I think sometimes less is more, and I'm just curious to see what your thoughts are about that.
I mean, in some way, it's definitely become this trendy thing, and there's an HGTV show about it or something. It's kind of but I mean, I think the idea to make a smaller impact on the earth is coming from a really good place. Maybe there's a way to do it without going to an extreme, but if it helps people especially people who need affordable housing, and not just to be trendy and look at both this cute house, but is there a way to actually use that to solve, problems of homelessness or just people who can't afford rent, because that's a real problem in a lot of cities and other places. So I think, there are some potential applications for that could be good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Every time I look up, there is a new show on HGTV and some variation of a tiny home. So it's kind of funny.
Exactly. Or even just thinking like emergency, like disaster housing. It's like, I mean, there's so many ways to think, how can we design something compact that, like helps people in a time of need and isn't just, a cute TV show. So.
Yeah. No, that's cool. That's cool. Well, man, you shared so much today. I want to save something for later because I'm sure people want to hear some more from you, but I really appreciate you, taking the time, to speak with us today. I mean, you're a writer, you're an architect, you're a Razorback. What else are you? Or is there anything else that we missed?
Lately, since I've been getting my business started, not so much, but hopefully maybe next time we talk, I'll have some new hobbies.
Okay. All right. No, that's all good. That's all good. Well, I certainly appreciate you joining us today on the Zweig Letter Podcast. It was a pleasure to have you, and we will certainly link to all the articles that we mentioned in our show notes so that people can get a look at your writing, about some of the ideas that you share, which I think are kind of, not necessarily groundbreaking, but they're definitely make a difference. And you certainly figured out a way to illuminate that nicely, and then what you're featured in on Architect Magazine. I think people should follow you, and for people that want to follow you, what's the easiest way for them to do that?
You can visit my website that needs help, which is murrye.com, murrye.com, or you can email me at murrye@gmail.com, and you can also follow me on Instagram is the one I post most, and that's I think it's at Murrye. I should know my own handle.
I believe it is at Murrye. And isn't your Twitter the same thing?
Twitter, yeah, I think Twitter may be Murrye Bernard, but I'm on both of those, so you can find me through any of those avenues.
Yeah, and we'll link to all the correct correct addresses in our show notes so that anybody that wants to connect with Murrye and let them know that they heard her here first on the Zweig Letter Podcast, that will be certainly appropriate. So, but
thanks, Randy. It's truly been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. It means a lot to get to connect with, especially with a firm that's doing great things and happens to be based in my home state and where I went to college. So that's pretty cool.
That's it. Now, so with all that said, are you rooting for the Razorbacks in March Madness, or?
I haven't been watching, but now you're making me feel like I need to check in.
Okay, well, they are a 7 seed, and while we don't like to date our podcast, this podcast is being recorded prior to their first round game against some team I can't keep track of, but I think they're playing. No, they're playing Butler. I'm just kidding. I was trying to be nice, but no, they're playing Butler. Okay. I think on Thursday or Friday of this week that we're recording this. So hopefully by the time this is out. And that the general public is listening to it, that they will have at least won their first round game, and other than that, we'll see what happens. So
we'll see. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, for sure. But thank you so much again, and we really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you, Randy. I appreciate it.
Yep. So, folks, listen, I really want to thank you again for listening to this episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. It was so awesome to have Murrye on the show today. I can't tell you that we are reaching out to high quality individuals like Murrye and others that have a lot of information to share to our listeners. And we certainly want to make sure that we're providing you with the utmost relevant information. I also want to share with you just a special gift. It's my way of saying thank you for listening to this podcast, for sharing it with other people. I have a free copy of the Zweig Letter to give to you. It's not just a free copy. It is a digital subscription to the Zweig Letter. You'll be able to just go to zweiggroup.com and you can download. At that point, you can just put your email address in and you will get on a weekly basis every Monday morning a fresh copy of the Zweig Letter, which is 12 pages of uninterrupted content on the design industry. And in those 12 pages, you'll find everything from articles on architecture, articles on engineering, best practices, business development, marketing, branding, everything related to the design industry and how you can help your firm to operate more efficiently. You'll find within the pages of the Zweig Letter. And so we certainly encourage you to get your free subscription today, and maybe even sometime in the near future, once you've subscribed to the Zweig Letter, you'll actually see an article written by our featured guest, Murrye Bernard, and that would be pretty exciting. So without further ado, I want to thank you again for listening to this episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. I am Randy Wilburn, your host, and remember, we exist to make you more successful. Bye for now.
Thanks for tuning in to this Zweig Letter Podcast episode. If you want more wisdom and inspiration, in addition to information about M&A, strategic planning, HR, and marketing your firm, subscribe now to the digital version of the Zweig Letter free of charge. Just visit thezweigletter.com/subscribe and leave your email address. Your free subscription will begin immediately.